Yes, so this is a view from the top. We obviously, I think, I'm going to introduce them, but they probably need no introduction. Rob Weisbord, COO and President of Broadcast from Sinclair, and Princell Hare, President of Allen Media Broadcasting, home of Michael Spiesman. And if you guys don't know, the guy gives me a hard time every time. So that's just, I had to mention him. So yesterday, we talked, we always start off the conference, and I think everybody knows the purpose of this conference is really to talk about the future challenges and opportunities. And we began the day yesterday, I said, you know, really, for me, I think we know a lot of the challenges. Let's talk about the opportunities.
Political.
Political,
sorry.
Yeah. But then what happened was we had our keynote speaker who said, oh, the industry is in a secular decline. But with that said, from my standpoint, I felt like yesterday I heard more optimism than I've heard in the past because of some of the opportunities. So, and of course this is a discussion, but I'm going to start with you, Princell. When you look at your organization over the next 5 years, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities for you all as a company?
Well, you know, we've made it very public at Allen Media that we are very bullish on broadcasting. You know, we're looking to expand our footprint in the broadcasting space. We believe that the consumption, not only do we believe it, it's you know, statistically proven that the consumption of content hasn't really changed. In fact, the appetite has grown, and it's really the platform with which it's consumed. So staying ahead of the consumer on the various platforms from a distribution standpoint as well as a monetization standpoint, you know, that's obviously a focal point for us going forward. But you know, we are big believers in the broadcast business.
This mic comes in and out. From your standpoint, what do you guys think as well? And I'm going to say it like this. So for me, when I think of ABC, NBC, CBS, you know, Paramount Plus, they literally offer nothing different than Netflix and Amazon. Sorry, I know that's brutal. But you all have something different because you are in these communities. So how do you guys think about taking advantage of that?
The first thing is, the last conversation, as spiritual as it was focusing on a legacy thought process. Rep firm, no rep firm, self-representation. It's a declining, that is a declining secular for broadcast, if you want to pigeonhole broadcast. And kudos to locality because they had a private equity firm with some different thoughts around technology, around specialists with categories and really sales solutions versus the traditional rep mentality of here's your avails, how low will we go, what's your highest threshold of pain, oh now there's preamp, so now we're in hell, and there's a much better way. And so our television stations are a part of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is cross-platform media company. And it takes time to change the legacy mentality, but not anybody in this room is big enough to take on Amazon, Apple, Facebook. We have a first mover advantage in the local communities, and you have to super serve those local communities. Because you could see what happened to radio when they gave up serving the communities. They just have disappeared and handed it over to streaming radio. What we can't do is give up our local relevance, but we have to figure out how to move this business together, whether it's Ann's over there at ATSC 3.0 as one of the lone warriors pushing to take our bits and really farm the bits and create business models. So I'm robust because we have all these bits, we have this farm, and we're trying to figure out what the crops are from the farm. But that's where we should all be bullish is we have this spectrum, we have capabilities to do hyperlocal, data-driven e-commerce that's all right there We just have to farm it properly, and we have to farm it together.
And so some of the stuff that came up yesterday, particularly around sports, right? Taking advantage of local sports in a way that potentially it's harder to do on a national basis. How do you think, so, I mean, I'm going to be a little brutal here. One thing is I remember, I guess it was in the late 60s. I don't remember that, but I'm not that old. But I remember, reading about it and seeing about it, how Channel 6 in Philadelphia, my hometown, adopted a new model of action news. And I feel like today it's still the exact same model, but old people watch news, but young people don't watch news. So how are you going to start? And because I think you guys have an opportunity, right? You have the ability to develop hyper-local and content that's different than anyone else can do. So where do you see that going? On
the news front, I would say that, it's not that young people don't watch news. They don't watch it on linear television. It's really, we're in a world now where we're talking about a news bundle. It's TV, it's web, it's social media, it's mobile, and we have to be, we have to have products that offer different value propositions on those various platforms. So we do have that ability in our local markets to offer that. As it relates to sports, sports is tribal. Sports is inherently local, and we are witnessing the RSN model imploding, which is giving opportunities to local stations to once again broadcast local sports. And I think, and that's the direction that the industry is going. So it gives us further inroads into really engaging with that local audience and those local communities.
I mean, do you guys really think like young people are watching your local news?
Again, they're not watching our local news on linear television. They're consuming local news on social media, on the web, on their mobile phones. It's a different, it's a different consumption pattern.
Sure. Okay, because listen, I'm not young either.
Yeah, so let me, I'll frame it from just the use of the word news is a legacy statement. We do content, right? So in Sinclair, I've killed the name news. You work in a content center because nobody on any college campus, professor, is recommending their students come to work for a broadcast television stage. I've heard it across the country because they're misunderstanding it. So when you give somebody producing content an opportunity to do a TikTok video or YouTube short, you have to introduce what I'll call the next gen viewer to content and content delivered how they want it. So you start it on digital, but it doesn't mean they won't come back to linear. So we're launching two basically 24/7 local content in Seattle and Salt Lake because we're converting a Univision to a CW, and we're going to try different formats, and we might fall flat on our face, and I'm okay to fall flat on our face because we don't try to take the risk now there might not be a tomorrow, right? The boomers like a 2-minute package. I have two Gen Zs that will hate 2-minute packages, but they're up to speed on what's going on in current events. They're up to speed on what's happening in the world, but they're a mile wide and an inch deep because social media has trashed what is really fact or non-fact based content, and that's our power. We're controlled by the government rules and regulations, so we deliver fact-based content. And not everything you read on social media is the truth. You don't know if bots are placing it. And so that's what we have to hone in on. And we should all be on college universities and universities to dispel this misnomer that broadcast is dead, nobody wants to watch it. Because outside of Netflix, can you name a streamer that is in the black? There's not one streaming company in the black. So it's a house of cards going on right now. And what you have is a la carte model. And when you add up what you're paying for in this a la carte model, you're back to a bundle. So why would you leave the bundle? Because you've just added up to be back in a bundle.
I'll just add that, you know, our kids have not, and in my case, my kids, have not grown up to become us. The millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen As, you know, they're not having 2.3 kids and driving a minivan. They are consuming content on all of these various different platforms, and we have to, as media professionals, we have to meet the consumers where they are.
And then you can't discount the reach of what we do. I had a nice conversation with Mr. Lafort, who I heard had a spiritual panel yesterday, but let's look at the power of broadcast. When Yellowstone came from a non-watch streamer to CBS, and what the unduplicated audience, which was in the high 70s, that had never seen Yellowstone. So Yellowstone, all of a sudden, 5 seasons in, and for the first time is being viewed by a whole different audience and a much larger audience than on a streamer.
So it's interesting because I think the idea of honesty and facts and truth is clearly something that's on your side, right? And they talked about even yesterday, I forget who said it, but the prediction is that something like 97 or 99% of stuff that we'll see on the internet by next year is all going to be AI driven and may not even be necessarily factual. So that is a great point. And on the regulatory environment, I think about this a lot. And I had this conversation with somebody yesterday about, I mean, I know who it was, but I don't want to name them just in case they don't want to be named. The idea that this is a regulated environment and therefore it makes this, the buying and selling somewhat, let's say, I don't want to say inefficient, but not necessarily a free capital market. And so I think on the regulatory environment, I mean, I think today it's clear that things aren't going to necessarily change. But the government seems to still be stuck in the 1950s when it comes to your organizations versus the fact that really you're competing against Google, Amazon, Facebook, and they have unfettered reign and you don't. When do you think the government's going to eventually wake up and understand that giving you the power to do more things is in the benefit of this country?
In about 3 more generations. Look, I remember this must be like 10, 15 years ago when the head of the FCC was saying, and he had it down, and then Michael Powell, and then he bounced out of there because he couldn't take the politics on the Hill, right? And, you know, what most people don't think about is broadcast, because of the constraints, operates on the one fundamental of the freedom of speech, while the streaming and the cable channels operate on a whole different freedom of speech. And so when nobody actually knows if you're watching broadcast cable or a streamer, you think the light bulbs would go on Capitol Hill, but, you know, and there are some folks from Tegner in here, and they went through an up and down because I haven't seen a more diversified group trying to buy it if it was a free enterprise market, having a Korean American female CEO. And I asked the head of NAB to try to qualify from the FCC, what is diversity? I mean, if that wasn't diversity where a female is in charge, how many CEO females are there of broadcast companies? And I have a daughter, I have a wife in the business, so I'm pro-female, and it scratches my head. And I don't know the full intricacies, but Stanton General basically gave away the farm. I won't raise retrans. I won't let anybody go in the newsrooms. It doesn't matter what the economic conditions are. He was willing to sign a document to test the FCC. And they still passed it along. So our business is not currently in a free enterprise business, because who's going to buy it now? And now the interest rates are up, so it's untenable to pay a debt load if you come into the business right now.
Though you guys are looking at buying ABC, isn't that right?
We're looking at buying everything. Look, my boss is very acquisitive. Our company is acquisitive. We're currently represent 5% of the country. So there's a lot of room for growth. As I said earlier, we are big believers in the broadcast business. And, when ABC is ready, they'll only need to make one phone call.
There you go. And Rob, let me ask you this, though. I mean, and I hear you with Standard. And personally, like, I fully understand the argument, but conversely, do you think part of the pushback really was because Apollo was the backer, and Apollo already had CMG?
That's a ridiculous argument, and I'll tell you why. Because how Nexstar grew was they bought, the former Standard General, which was Lynn, Young, Media General, okay? And kudos to Nexstar, but that came from Standard General. So what changed over the years? You're going to tell me financial structure? It's who's the management team and who's backing it, And it's hard to gobble up financing in 2023 against the legacy business. So they were able to gobble it up, and now it's just an afterthought. But it's like, if that wasn't diversity and they're promoting diversity, somebody, for me, has to define what diversity is.
So I'm going to change the subject here, because I do want to address the future as far as income streams go. And I remember this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, seeing Perry Sook on a panel. He was talking about how retrans fees are really all that matter to Wall Street and how important they are. And clearly, they are still a big component of your, it's a chunky, it's a major chunk of your revenue. And I'm not saying they're going away, and they have come up, but is there an inflection point where they either flatten out or start to go down? And how do you think about the future when it comes to retrans versus other revenue streams? And I'm going to just throw it out there, whoever wants to take that first.
Sure. Look, retrans is still a huge part of our business, and a key driver to our businesses. But we have to think about, multiple revenue streams. We can't get caught up with really focusing on 1 or 2 revenue streams. We have to look for streams everywhere. NextGen may present new revenue stream opportunities for us. So it's constantly, just evolving the business and looking at it from a macro level, and not getting completely just, drunk with retrans revenue and political.
And
That's political is obviously funny, but it's how do politicians get elected? And that's where the government should be stepping in to protect the value of local. They didn't do it with newspapers. Newspapers is gone. It's very tough to run a full news in small markets. The costs don't go down in proportion. You could skinny it up, but the money, that's why you have to be diversified, because as the money goes outside of broadcast, it gets tougher and tougher to support small markets. And the companies that are left have a portfolio of scale, but you have to make different decisions. And, we created the national desk to fill in those smaller markets to provide news to the communities. And I think that almost all our vendors are in this room sponsoring this thing. We have Operative, we have Advisor, we have Raid Optics. Compulses are our digital national agency. So I'm old and I've been with the company a long time, going on 27 years, and I started the digital division 18 years ago when it was text messaging and perfunctory websites. And it's grown, and the ecosystem is very, very sophisticated now, and other revenue and business models have come into our world. And that's why when you say you work at a TV station, I don't want anybody inside our company saying they work in a TV station. That was your 1960s, 70s, and 80s, is you work in a cross-platform media building. And I'm not all the way there. I'd like to say I'm all the way there, but you start to weed out, and you start to change the vernaculars. We changed every job description to position it that you are in a cross-media business, because that you can't just say it. You have to live, eat, and breathe what you're doing. You have to put the systems in place. I love that Nexstar has sales enablement. I don't actually know what we call it, but we have it. But you got to be able to take all these APIs and put them into a centralized platform that makes it easy for the sellers. Your best sellers just want to sell. They don't want to be inhibited. So how do you make it easy to go forward? And while everybody likes to just attack Nielsen, and I've done my fair share, and I'm saying it because Paul's there, that I also gave him some helpful hints to how Nielsen could help us outside of the ratings last night. But, it comes down to who's your audience? What's the qualitative? And, and that's always de minimis in all these conversations, is we have a very viable audience that buys billions of dollars worth of merchandise, and that's the reason why you advertise, is so somebody could sell something. Otherwise, if we didn't do that, they could go invest in the stock market, a CD right now that's paying better than the market, and get a return on investment. And that's what has to be focused on, because, okay, you could go buy 500,000 impressions on a digital, but did you sell a widget, and what time did it air? And I've seen some funky invoices when I've been asked to audit stuff, and that's why you need managed services, because the unsophisticated would be ripped off. They don't know if they're buying OTT, CTV. We speak the vernacular. Inside this room, we know what it is, but don't assume that the people spending the money actually understand where the eyeballs are at and how to get the right eyeballs.
You made a number of great points. One I liked in particular, so I'm just going to comment on it, the idea of the local, because if you look at, they've done studies and they've shown from the paper standpoint, when you lose your local paper, corruption starts going up in government. And you're right, that is, if the government doesn't really, and maybe they don't want local, right? But I think it's important we have that community watchdog, because without them, we don't have that protection.
So let me pinpoint just a microcosm of that. The state attorney, former state attorney in Baltimore, just was found guilty on corruption, and we exposed it, okay? How long was it going on? Would it have continued if it didn't get? And that's our purpose, is to hold people accountable and tell people what's right about their communities.
We still have the power to change the laws. We're in the midst of a story at our station in Iowa, as a matter of fact, that is producing a new law on the books in that state. Anytime that there are fewer voices in the community, the level of accountability drops. So it's incumbent upon us to continue to invest in our local stations, in the local markets, so that we can do our jobs, and that is to hold the powerful accountable.
So we just have a minute 30 left. I'm going to quickly go through a couple of things. We might go a minute over. One of the things I'm just more curious about, so this is more for my edification, is still the over-the-air, right? We've seen, I don't want to call it a resurgence, but we have seen, I would say, a significant uptick in people starting to take advantage. And you're right, there is this idea, and people showed the stats yesterday, that people are now paying more for their streaming services than they are for the bundle. But conversely, when they do go to streaming and they cut the cord, they still have access to your programming, which I think makes it even more valuable. And I remember seeing something about millennials, like 40% of them thought they were actually stealing television. When you think about that, is that something that you're looking to, I mean, ATSC3 aside, do you see that as a viable opportunity to grow for you?
Yes, is a short answer, comma. All you have to do is walk into a Best Buy, and there's a big display. I have a picture on my phone that I sent out to everybody, is promoting HD broadcast antenna, right? And you could buy it as cheap as $32, and you get HD unfiltered, okay, content. When it goes through cable, it gets denigrated. Al could speak much better than I can against the denigration, but it gets denigrated. The only purified way is through that antenna. And you could even look at the growth of diginets, okay, and that viewership, which even today shocks me how many people tune into the old stuff, because the old stuff is great. And this is what everybody has to think about is, so you fall in love with Ted Lasso, last 5 seasons, 60 episodes. Shrinking comes out hot. Who knows when it's coming back? Jack Reacher, hot. Never could be syndicated. It's already international. There's no residuals. So where most of this room grew up on Friends, Seinfeld, Big Bang, never again under this current ecosystem will that ever show up again. And that is cheating the next generation of having great content.
Do you have any final words?
Sure, I'll give you a second yes. I read somewhere the other day that cable penetration in New York, the #1 market, is, I think it was 58% was the number that I saw. But the content is being consumed, and it's being consumed over the air. And I have 5 kids. My youngest daughter is 27, and she lives in a house with several other girls in D.C. And she said to me the other day, "Dad, we got this antenna. We can see all of the stations." I'm like, "Yeah, welcome to 1970." But it's happening, and it is another, we talked about revenue streams for us. It is another platform with which our customers can consume our content, and another potential revenue stream.
So with that, we are out of time. I really wanted to thank both of you for joining us.